Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. We often talk about relaxing activities we do or outings we take and things we enjoy to blow off steam. I know we've talked about fishing and how some people find that relaxing, but remember, in order to be considered relaxing, you should be able to count on not seeing or stumbling upon anything unexpected or upsetting. I don't see how hunting can be enjoyable at all, but that's just me. But we're not here to talk about that. On October 16th, 1993, two men who were illegally hunting in an area called Yellowhouse Canyon, which is just outside Lubbock, Texas, were making their way through the brush when they stumbled upon a human skull. They didn't notify police, as they thought that since they had been hunting in the area illegally, there would be legal repercussions for them. When they got home, they had told a friend what they had found, and the friend ended up calling police and reporting that human remains had been found in Yellowhouse Canyon. They were able to give police details of the location, and officers arrived to the scene and quickly sectioned the isolated area off. Near the skull, there were a few pieces of women's clothing found, including a shoe with a low heel. It is possible that these clothes had nothing to do with this suspected homicide. As you know, finding a skull would have meant that it would have had to have been there for a while in order to get in this state, as the remains would have since deteriorated. Since very little else was found in the immediate area, it was thought that most of the bones would have been carried off by scavenging animals. At this point, only the skull was found, so it is possible that it was placed there intentionally. After carefully sifting through the dirt, several other small bones and fragments of bones, including pieces of a spine and a pelvic bone, were found. They also recovered a single strand of red hair, and if it had come from the victim whom the skull belonged to, this would have been a significantly valuable clue in determining the victim's identity. It would have been truly remarkable to find that this hair belonged to this skull, as a forensic anthropologist had estimated that the bones had been outside in this area, exposed to the elements for at least a year, and most likely longer. He found that a bone from the base of the spine had indicated that the victim was female, which made sense, as the skull also had indications that the victim was female. The characteristics of the skull showed that the victim was likely Caucasian, and because the cranial sutures were not yet closed, the victim was estimated to be a young adult, somewhere between the ages of 18 and 24. There were several visible dental fillings as well as an intact crown, and investigators hoped they were in good enough condition to compare to their file of dental records. The dental records of the skull were compared to 64 young women that had been reported missing in the United States, some being from as far away as New Jersey, and unfortunately, none were determined to be a match. So this woman had not been reported missing, meaning her family might not have known she was missing, or it's possible that she might not have had any family. Many of the bones had evidence of knife wounds, meaning that the cause of death might have involved stabbing, or possibly dismemberment post-mortem. There were knife marks found on the shoulder blade, vertebrae, and various places on the skull. There was not yet a conclusive cause of death. A forensic artist named Karen Taylor, who worked with the Texas Department of Public Safety, was called in to create a composite sketch of what this young woman might look like based on the skull. Karen was known for developing a technique called two-dimensional facial reconstruction. Other than having an estimated age and being determined as being Caucasian, there was not much else to go on. Karen used the skull and placed rubber markers all over it to approximate the facial tissue thickness that would be consistent with someone who is Caucasian. By doing this, she was able to establish peaks and contours that would have made sense on her face, in her forehead, cheek, chin, and jaw area, which would give investigators an idea of her face shape and possible distinguishing features. After placing these markers, Karen photographed the skull and placed transparent paper over top to sketch out her features. She started with the eyes, as based on the hollows, this would yield the most accurate feature, as the size and shape were already established, as found on the bone. She used the measurement for the average human eyeball, which was 25 millimeters in diameter, which is roughly the same size as a quarter. It was significantly easier to approximate the eye area than the nose, since the bone only extends so far, and everyone's bridge is different. The majority of the nose would have been made up of cartilage, so the size and shape would not necessarily be super obvious with the two-dimensional reconstruction technique. Same story with the ears. Being made up of mostly cartilage, there was no bone to use as a guide to get anywhere with their appearance or unique characteristics, such as if they stuck out more or were more flat. Research shows that a Caucasian female nose has skin and cartilage that extends about 1/5 of an inch on either side of the nasal cavity, so Karen used this measurement to sketch the approximate size and width of the victim's nose. As she was doing this, she found that based on the bone structure, the victim had an asymmetric nasal aperture, which meant that her nose had a slight slant, and this was reflected in her sketch. This facial characteristic was at least something to go on that they wouldn't have been able to tell on the skull alone without Karen's sketch. Karen knew that among the bones, a single strand of red hair was found, and she used that hair color to interpret that the victim had somewhere between dark blonde auburn to medium red hair. Also, based on the possibility that the victim had red hair, it was likely that she also had lighter eyes, with Karen's sketch reflecting that her eyes were blue. Karen's drawing was released to the media and law enforcement all throughout Texas, with the hopes that by putting a face to the bones, someone would recognize her and come forward. After the police released the details of a young woman's remains being found in Yellowhouse Canyon, residents began calling in with tips. One tip was from a woman who said her husband had done it because he was a knife freak, but this was quickly determined as not being credible, as this woman then revealed that she and her husband had a custody hearing the next day, and she was just basically trying to get him in trouble or make it so he wouldn't show up. A woman named Beverly Tillery saw this woman's picture in the newspaper shortly after its release and was convinced that it was her 17-year-old daughter, Belinda. Beverly had 5 children, and she asked one of her sons if he thought that the sketch looked like Belinda. He said yes, and agreed that she had similar characteristics to him and his siblings. Beverly's daughter Belinda had been missing for more than a year. After comparing dental records, this mystery woman was confirmed as being Belinda Tillery. Belinda was born to Beverly and Robert Tillery on December 27, 1974, in Hobbs, New Mexico. She was the 4th of 5 children and the couple's first daughter. The family moved to Lubbock, Texas when the children were young, as that's where they remember primarily growing up. Belinda was very close to her 4 siblings, her younger sister Robin, and older brothers Walter, Robert, and Danny. She was particularly close to her brother Danny and considered him her best friend. Belinda was described by her younger sister Robin as being somewhat of a tomboy when she was younger, but as she got older, she loved dressing up and playing with makeup. While in school, Belinda didn't really have any interests in any extracurricular activities. She found herself more drawn to the party crowd. When she was 13, Belinda was removed from her family home and placed in a children's home for about 4 years. At 17, she returned to her family's home and got a job as a dancer at a club. At the time of her disappearance, Belinda was working as a dancer at a club owned by a biker gang called the Bandidos. The Bandidos didn't have a great reputation around town. It is unclear how long Belinda had been working in the club, being underage, but it was likely assumed that because the club was owned by the Bandidos, they got away with a lot, including employing underage dancers. A detective went to the club to talk to the employees and get any information they could on Belinda and her time working there. The owners and the employees were less than forthcoming, and no one was willing to talk to police. A man that worked the front of the club said he didn't know anyone by the name of Belinda, and certainly no one with that name worked here. Another club employee later spoke to the detective, and she basically said the same thing, that no one by that name worked here. According to Belinda's family, they said that she had gone to work at the club on the night of her disappearance. She wasn't feeling well that night and had called her brother Walter to pick her up and give her a ride home. After taking her home, he had assumed that she had just gone upstairs and gone to sleep, as he didn't see her for the rest of the evening. Her brother had had a few drinks that evening and had gone to his room to lie down. When he woke up the following morning, he looked in Belinda's room, and she wasn't there. She hadn't left a note or told anyone she was leaving. When speaking to police, Belinda's mother had said that she had just found out she was newly pregnant, just about 7 weeks along, and she had just found out after a trip to the doctor, after she had not been feeling well for several days. Belinda was surprised to find out that she was pregnant, but not necessarily in like a state of shock, more so in like a state of stun. She wanted to make changes in her life. She wanted to settle down and be a mom. The more time that went on, the more she was looking forward to motherhood. She planned on leaving her job at the club and wanted to go back and finish school so she could get a better job and better care for her child. When police inquired about the baby's father, Belinda's family believed it to be her ex-boyfriend, a man named Troy Armstrong. Troy was 27 years old at the time, and Belinda's family was not too fond of him. Her mother thought he drank too much, and he had a lengthy criminal history, much of which included petty crimes. He was not in a position to get it together and raise a child with Belinda, as he lived a transient lifestyle, and he didn't really ever have a permanent address. He would at times be living in his car or staying with friends, and he often prioritized his drug habit over everything else. Police were eager to speak with Troy, but when they went to try and track him down, they discovered that he had skipped town several months earlier. Word around town was that he was in Roswell, New Mexico. Detectives went to Roswell to try and find him, spending several days there, only to come up with nothing. They eventually found his latest girlfriend, a woman named Angela Allen, living in Lubbock. At first, when Angela came up on police's radar, she was reluctant to help. Detectives had to follow up with her several times to get any information, and each time they spoke, she would give up a little more. At the time, it was unclear if she was trying to protect him, but I don't think she was. I get the impression that she just wanted to distance herself. She had dated Troy after Belinda, so you can't really blame her for not wanting to affiliate herself with someone's ex-girlfriend. Angela said that their relationship started out wonderful and that she really loved him, but as time went on, he became very abusive, and this escalated to him physically beating her on multiple occasions. Troy really didn't keep Belinda a secret, as Angela knew all about her. Once even recalling a message that Belinda had left on the answering machine, telling Troy that they needed to talk because she was pregnant. so Troy obviously knew about the pregnancy. Angela recalls an instance where she and Troy were at a local bar, a different one than where Belinda worked, and they ended up seeing her there. This was after Belinda had left the message on their answering machine. Troy had never called her back or spoken to her since, and she came up to their table yelling, saying that she didn't need him and that she was going to raise the baby all by herself. This confrontation at the bar happened just a few days before Belinda went missing. Angela says after this, she ended things with Troy as she just wanted nothing to do with the situation. Angela was adamant that Troy needed to take care of business and support whatever Belinda wanted to do, be it to terminate the pregnancy or support her in keeping the baby. We knew from Belinda's mother that she definitely wanted to keep the baby, and she was very excited about becoming a mom. Angela had given police several items that Troy had left behind before he went to New Mexico, and one of the items was a large serrated knife. This was immediately intriguing to them, as the forensic anthropologist had found evidence of knife marks on several of Belinda's bones. They needed to see if the knife would have produced the same marks as those found on the bones. Since so much time had passed, and especially since the bones had been outside and exposed to the elements for over a year, some of the knife marks would have become somewhat distorted and warped, meaning that the cuts would not necessarily make an exact match to a knife, despite it being the same one used. Because of this, although it could not be conclusively said that this exact knife inflicted those exact cuts, it was definitely considered to be the potential murder weapon, as the cut pattern would have been reasonably believed to have been inflicted by this knife. Investigators got as far as they could with this potential evidence, and they knew that they needed to track down Troy if there was any hope at getting any answers about what happened to Belinda. At this point, Troy was the prime suspect, and he was nowhere to be found. Angela, I feel, helped as much as she could, and to the best of her ability, especially since we know Troy had been abusive and violent to her in the past. Although Troy wasn't in town, Angela felt that every time she helped police, she was putting herself in danger. Not knowing where he was or who he was in contact with, there was no telling if he was following the investigation, and if anything Angela had said or revealed might get back to him. Angela revealed that shortly after the confrontation in the bar, Troy had taken Belinda camping in Yellow House Canyon to discuss what they should do moving forward. This whole instance is not sitting right with me because the two of them were not on good terms at all, and it just seems odd to invite someone to go camping to talk about such a serious matter. Like, why not meet in the daytime at a public place? Like, under what circumstances would it be a good idea to go to a remote area at night? Especially with this guy. And another thing, Belinda was wearing high heels that night. And assuming she knew about the camping trip, why would she not wear sensible shoes? I feel she might have been misled or not told the words, "We're going camping." Just, that's very odd, no? Under the circumstances, and based on how Troy had been acting in the weeks after the end of their relationship, and after knowing about the pregnancy, it might have been reasonable to believe that Belinda had been lured to this area or brought there under false pretenses. Another thought I had was Belinda might not have known or expected that she would be spending the night and wore high heels because she thought they would just talk for a few hours and afterwards she'd return home. I'm not sure. I just feel this is very suspicious. And I'm not the only one. After Troy returned home from the camping trip, Angela felt that he was acting very suspicious. Troy had turned up to Angela's house, and he had blood all over his hands and a cut on his hand that he said happened accidentally while camping. At the time, Angela did not find this to be too concerning because she didn't know what happened on the trip. She felt she had no reason not to believe him. It was only a year later, when Angela had learned that Belinda's remains were found in Yellow House Canyon, that she knew the truth. All the pieces started falling into place, and she knew that Troy had killed Belinda. Police had issued a warrant for Troy's arrest, who at this point was still missing. Angela had told police that they should reach out to Troy's best friend, who worked as a truck driver for a company in California. Fearing for her safety and wanting to get justice for Belinda, she wanted him caught. Police went to the trucking company and asked for the location of Troy's friend, and the trucking company knew exactly where he was. Based on the GPS that was attached to the truck, he was located in York, Nebraska. Local police were able to get in contact with the Nebraska Highway Patrol and filled them in on what was going on. A few hours later, the Nebraska Highway Patrol set up a roadblock and flagged the truck down. Once pulled over, officers approached the driver, asking if he knew of Troy's whereabouts. During the stop, an officer opened the passenger side door and found Troy hiding in the truck's cab. Troy was then promptly arrested and charged with Belinda Tillery's murder. Troy was adamant that he didn't have anything to do with Belinda's murder and that he didn't know what had happened to her. While in custody, Troy was found to have a key to a storage unit in New Mexico on his person. When investigators turned up to the unit, they found several items that belonged to Belinda. Among them, her driver's license, jewelry, and other small items, small things that she would carry in her purse, basically things she was thought to have on her on the night of her murder. It is believed that Troy had no intention of supporting Belinda or her baby, and he was just more upset that his relationship with Angela ended because she found out about Belinda's pregnancy. It's possible that Troy thought if he took care of the Belinda situation, that Angela would just come back to him like nothing happened, and they'd be able to resume their lives. Initially believed that Troy had just come up with the camping trip to use as an excuse, it was revealed that he had in fact borrowed camping equipment from a friend, so he did have intentions of spending the night in Yellow House Canyon with Belinda. But was this just an excuse to have her out at night in an isolated area? I'm thinking yes. Troy had met Belinda at the club where she worked and must have said something convincing to get her to come along. He knew she had already made her mind up about what she wanted to do, so he probably just told her what she wanted to hear in order to lure her out. To Belinda, there was nothing to decide. She had planned on keeping the baby, and to do this, she would count on Troy's support, at least at the beginning. It's possible that Troy had alluded to agreeing to this, as Belinda, being so young, knew she would need the help, and he preyed off her desperation. Troy picked Belinda up after her shift at her home and drove to Yellow House Canyon. Once in the secluded area, it is believed an argument ensued and escalated to violence. Based on her bones found at the scene, Belinda had been stabbed several times in her back. Troy then packed up the camping equipment and left Belinda for dead. He then drove to Angela's house and told her that he had cut his hand while camping and didn't mention anything about Belinda or their discussion. At the trial, Angela revealed that Troy had told her that he had killed Belinda, and if she ever said anything, he'd kill her too. He also threatened her kids and her dad, and she knew that Troy had violent tendencies, and for obvious reasons, She felt that she was in danger and that he would keep his word. The prosecution had argued that on or about July 24th, 1992, Troy and Belinda had argued during the camping trip, and he had killed Belinda by stabbing her at least 5 to 11 times in the back. He killed her in order to get out of any responsibility of taking care of Belinda or her baby, including paying child support, or because he was upset that Angela had left him and had assumed that with Belinda out of the picture, she would take him back. It was probably a combination of both. This was all very compelling. However, the prosecution was never able to produce a murder weapon. The serrated knife given to them by Angela, although very possible that it was the weapon used, could not be conclusively determined. This was argued in Troy's favor, that there was no way to know the exact weapon used, and no weapon was found that would have matched the marks on Belinda's skull were ever found among his possessions. Doctors Harrell Gill-King and Randall Frost testified for the state. Dr. Gill-King is an expert in anthropology and forensic pathology and is the director of the Laboratory for Human Identification and Forensic Anthropology at the University of North Texas Health and Science Center. And Dr. Frost is a forensic pathologist with the Lubbock County Medical Examiner's Office. They provided evidence that over time, the cut marks on the skull would have shown signs of being worn down, as the skull had been exposed to the elements for over a year. So even if the murder weapon was in their possession, it might not necessarily match the marks. We know that based on what Angela said on the night he had returned from the camping trip, that he had cut his hand while there, so he would have had something to cut himself with. Sounds like a knife to me. The trial lasted 4 days, and on December 5th, 1996, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Troy Armstrong guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. In addition to killing Belinda, Troy also killed her unborn baby. Angela felt that he got off too easy and should have been given the death penalty. I feel Angela was very brave in giving up so much information to police, as she had good reason to believe that she and her family were in danger and could have been harmed at the hands of Troy. Troy's defense later tried to have his conviction overturned because they claimed the state had failed to disclose evidence favorable to them, which was the testimony of the state's witness, Belinda's brother, Walter Tillery. Walter had testified for the state on December 4th. During his cross-examination, Walter had said he had suffered an electrocution accident in April of 1994, which had affected his short-term memory and caused him to lose his senses of smell and taste, as well as the feeling in his right hand. Walter had first been approached by investigators for the state in October of 1994 and testified that he was 100% sure of the facts which he had given the state and about which he testified. After his examination, the defense had argued that the state had violated the court's order by failing to reveal this accident, and because of this, had moved for a mistrial or continuance to permit the investigation of the witness's memory loss. This seems like such a reach at this point, because the details that Walter was able to give had been verified by police, and the exact details of his accident wouldn't appear to make a difference in the case. I believe that even without Walter testifying at all, there would still be enough evidence to connect Troy to this crime, and certainly secure and uphold the conviction. Walter's testimony was just a piece in the mountain of evidence, not the sole nugget that the entire case would fall apart without. After refusing the mistrial, the trial court commented that it thought that the information was impeaching evidence and should have been disclosed. The trial court then instructed his counsel to have an investigator contact the custodian of Walter's medical records. The prosecutor then explained that she did not notify the defense because Walter told her his memory loss was short-term and only caused him to forget little things. After this, the judge returned the jury to the courtroom, and the trial was completed without any attempt to recall Walter for further cross-examination or any further request for a ruling on a continuance. The defense declared that because the prosecution had failed to advise them on Walter's accident when they first learned about it, they knowingly failed to properly disclose evidence. They said it had been held that favorable evidence includes impeachment evidence as well as exculpatory evidence. They added that Walter was the only witness who testified that Troy might have known that Belinda's baby was not his and may have been angered by that knowledge. I do believe this was a last-ditch effort, as since there was absolutely no way to prove paternity at this point, they were using an emotional ploy almost as an excuse for being angry, but not really denying guilt. You do with that what you will, but that's how I see it. Their argument was that without having reason to be angry, there was no motive for Troy to have carried out the murder. They took advantage of the fact that Walter had suffered an accident and exaggerated his inability to recall facts that might have been beneficial to the defense. To me, this seems like nothing more than an attempt to destroy Walter's credibility, but again, it's not like Walter's testimony was the only piece of the puzzle. It certainly supported Angela's testimony, who had alleged facts linking Troy to Belinda's murder. I'm not sure how much of a difference it would have made to have disclosed Walter's medical history prior to the trial, as it had such a minimal impact on the trial as a whole. If anything, it would have just dragged it out further. Walter never made outrageous claims that couldn't be verified. And if you take Walter out of the equation altogether, I believe the verdict would have been the same. Later, Troy's counsel did have the opportunity to cross-examine Walter, and even though they had the chance to obtain his medical records, they, for some reason, chose not to. I know, after all that. They found that the counsel did a competent and effective job of conducting the defense. Because the defense had the opportunity to cross-examine Walter about his ability to recall facts, and because they did not take advantage of the opportunity to actually obtain his medical records and investigate to find anything relevant to present in court, it was found that it was not reasonably probable that the outcome would have been any different. The motion to have Troy's conviction overturned was denied and overruled, and the judgment of the trial court was affirmed. Troy was last known to have been incarcerated in the Alfred Hughes facility in Gatesville, Texas. He had filed an appeal in 1997, which was denied. He also filed a motion in 2021 for his release, which again was denied. Belinda's siblings have fond memories of their sister growing up, and certainly miss her a great deal. Belinda's mother, Beverly, passed away on February 17th, 2010, at the age of 62 in Kingsland, Texas. Just so much heartbreak for this family. Belinda's life was so tragically cut short when it was only just beginning. Just so very sad. Let me know your thoughts on this case. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.